Welcome partners and guests to the VALPRO Path webinar exploring the gaps and lock-in situations in Europe's plant protein sector. My name is Dusan Chaneas from Fullscale Hub, and today we will uncover the barriers to growth and lock-in situations in the EU's plant protein sector. Our speakers for today are Dr. Ewen Mullins, head coordinator of the VALPRO Path project and head of crop science department at Chagas. Dr. Moritz Reckling, task leader in the VALPRO Path project and a researcher from Lynch Center of Agricultural Landscape Research, ZALF. He will be presenting with his colleague, Dr. Hiba El-Selahi. Dr. Maeve Henchion, Work Package 1 leader for the VALPRO Path project and head of Department of Agri-Food Businesses and Spatial Analysis in Chagas, and Richard Lynch, project manager of the VALPRO Path project. Before we start, a couple of notes. If you have any questions during the webinar, please write them down in the Zoom chat, and after the presentations are finished, we will go over them during the Q&A session. The webinar will be recorded, so please, unless you're speaking, turn off your microphone, keep your cameras on, and at the end of the webinar, we'll have a group photo. Thank you, and Dr. Ewen Mullins, you may begin.
Thank you, Dusan, and good morning, everybody. You're very welcome to our webinar on VALPRO Path. So, what is the ambition of VALPRO Path? Well, in a nutshell, really, it's about demonstrating novel value for plant protein crops so that we can deliver those new models, those new business models of circularity, value chain resilience. And in essence, what it is, it's about getting more value from materials that are already produced very, very well across Europe. We grow protein crops very well, and primarily it's grown for animal feed and livestock. But really, VALPRO Path is about taking that material and exploiting it for new added value opportunity for the producers and other stakeholders through the value chain. Well, why do we need VALPRO Path? Well, we know basically Europe's plant protein landscape is not fit for purpose. That may seem quite a strong sentence, but in essence, it's true because that plant protein infrastructure across Europe, we don't have those premium supply chains. So we don't have the added value opportunities. We're growing the material and it's being used at a base level for livestock feed, a very valuable source of livestock feed. But VALPRO Path is asking the question, can we get more value from what we're already doing? And within VALPRO Path, compared to the existing systems at the moment, the values are the existing models are based on these old value paradigms. So there's little consideration for climate resilience, circularity, nutrient capture, all of those important components that we know really are essential for business systems going forward. So the real value is in, we know the farmers are producing it, but unfortunately, that value is not being realized by the producer. So what do we need to do? As I said, it's added value. Really, what it comes down is economics. We have to ensure that the primary producer, the primary production systems are economical, sustainable from both an environmental and a financial system. So it's focused on the principle of the right crop in the right place for the right market. We have to exploit the innovative processing approaches that are out there. They may not be applied to plant protein processing right now. They may be applied to other food processing systems, but can they be exploited and transferred and realigned to process and deliver new ingredients, new products based on plant protein as an ingredient? The key thing, of course, is while research and innovation and demonstration may show these various different pathways, we have to be able to empower the stakeholders to make that transition, to make that jump, and to make it in a way that is financially sustainable. And to do that within VALPRO, we're developing these sustainable business models. And the business models, in essence, are more like signposts, are in effect what we call them our IPSs, innovative production systems, whereby we can point to them and show, look, this is a model that actually does have the potential to work. And we demonstrate that both in practical terms, but also showing the economic benefit, the LCA work, and the social dynamics around that as well. And the whole idea, of course, is to deliver these new paradigms of production through co-design with all the stakeholders in the pathway. Speaking of pathways, this lovely infographic really captures the essence of VALPRO Path. And VALPRO Path, as I said, it's about co-creation, demonstration, and then transformation and evaluation. And as we go from left to right, that plant protein change, and Maeve will talk about the gap analysis that really is the foundation for the work with the colleagues in work package 1. But the key, and in addition to that, then as I said, the business models are built around these innovative production systems. So whether it's on-farm processing, varietal selection that Moritz and Heba will touch on as well, but also the agronomic actions. Are there simple agronomic actions that can promote better, more sustainable production, deal with many of the issues that are out there in the field right now across Europe? Nutrient tracking is really important for the food processors. They want to know where the ingredients are coming from, what are the inputs, be they energy or indeed agricultural inputs, and then cross-regional production. Are there scenarios where material is being produced in one part of Europe that can be exploited for value in another part? And really that connectivity just hasn't been made yet. That's really the core of what VALPRO is about. From this, the goal, of course, is then to overlay that with the LCA analysis and some business modeling, so that all together we have these new value landscapes for the plant protein pathways that are there. There are, of course, some immediate fundamental questions that we have to deal with. We know we can grow them, but we also need to consider the market. And so, I mean, what are the challenges in meeting consumer and industrial customer demands? Maeve will touch on that now shortly. But then after Maeve, Moritz and Heber are really going to get into, you know, if farmers are motivated to grow the grain legumes, are the inputs available? Are the systems there? Is the knowledge there? We hear about ACIS platforms, knowledge information systems. You know, is that framework there to support an expansion of plant protein crops in a way that will deliver in a consistent production level for food processing industries and produce those ingredients that could go into hundreds and thousands of food products? And of course, what is the difference if you're looking at the current productivity compared to the potential productivity of already grown peas, faba bean, and soya bean as well? So that, I hope, gives you a very brief introduction into VALPRO Path, an exciting Horizon Europe funded project. And now I'm going to pass to Maeve, who's going to talk about the gap analysis work that's already been done. As Dusan has said, if you have any questions, please, we encourage you to put them into the chat, and I hope you enjoy the webinar.
Thank you, Ewan. So I'm just going to get the full screen up there now. Okay, so does that look okay to everybody? Yeah. Okay, I'm assuming it's okay because I'm not hearing anything else. Okay, so
no, Maeve was second. Ewen is still sharing his screen.
Oh, sorry.
So we're still seeing your screen, Ewan, and
sorry, I'm having just a trouble with my computer. It won't respond. What I'll do is I'll drop out of the call and I'll come back in.
Sure.
Okay, so I'm screen sharing now. Is that
we can see it, Maeve, thanks.
Yeah, great. Okay. So thanks very much. I'm delighted to have this opportunity to talk to you about the work that we did in VALPRO Path to look at the gaps along the value chain. I just move it down for me now. Okay, so that's basically the framework that we're going to use, and Moritz will talk to you about that broad framework shortly. He's going to talk to you about the gaps in terms of the farm inputs and cultivation production. And then what I'm going to talk about, though, is really about the further on, the more upstream stages in the value chain. So the processing, the marketing, sales, retail, and moving on towards the consumer. And how I'm going to do it is I'm going to identify what we put into the key messages we put into the story map, whereby we really wanted to summarize the gaps that existed along the value chain. But obviously, there's only so much you can say in the story map. So as under each heading, then I'm going to elaborate that a little bit, I suppose, or try to nuance it a little bit to, I suppose, help us to really tease out what we're talking about. So under the processing, what we said in the story map was that advanced equipment and sustainable systems customized for the extraction of plant-based materials is a gap. And we said current infrastructure required for processing of plant-based ingredients includes extraction, separation, thermal treatment, and drying equipment. So we identified there were gaps there in relation to the extraction of plant-based materials. But really, I suppose that's an oversimplification in some respects, because the gap that actually exists at the processing level depends on the product we want to end up with. So if we think we're trying to develop a meat or dairy substitute or alternative, or we're trying to develop a plant-based protein, or we're trying to develop something else, that has implications for what gaps actually exist. And then that has implications for whether we're actually trying to celebrate the inherent attributes of the raw material or the ingredient, or we're actually trying to disguise it. And then whether we're focused on nutrition, or we're focused on a specific nutrient, or we're focused on the food, that has implications for where we see the gaps as well. And then which target segment we're looking at, whether it's flexitarians, vegetarians, and vegans, they will have different requirements, and that will result in the identification of different gaps ultimately as well. So depending on the product we want to end up with, depending on the target market, depending on how we're thinking about the plant-based material and the ultimate product or application, the technologies that we want to use, the ingredients we might want to use, the processes involved, there will be different gaps a lot for those depending on where we want to end up with. So I'll just elaborate on that a little bit now. So if we think about peas, we can produce a beautiful pea soup, and in that way we're celebrating the pea. We're trying to enhance the color, the texture, the flavor. We're very happy with that, and we present it in that way. So the gaps in trying to develop such a product obviously are that they really don't exist, because we have all the technologies that can allow us to produce a pea soup and to package it into a can or into some kind of a Tetra Pak or something as well. Also, when we think about peas in the context of a traditional fish and chip meal, you're not trying to disguise it, you're trying to enhance it with a little bit of flavoring like butter or mint, but there's nothing. We have the technologies to freeze the peas or to tin them or whatever, and we're celebrating the color and the flavor and the texture. But when we move on to then try to develop a plant-based protein powder from pea, we're doing a very different type of thing. So the gaps that exist when we're trying to mask the color, mask the flavor, produce a powder, they're very different gaps that would exist when you're trying to disguise the color or the flavor or the texture. So if we think about, there's a lot more we can do to celebrate legumes as they are, and that's really around kind of marketing and changing behavior. So these here they're lupin beans. They're in a jar there, and obviously, cooking lupins and putting them into a jar, vacuum. That there isn't we have the technologies for that, and that's a staple in the Portuguese diet, and it's used as a snack, or it can be made into a sauce as well. So we can do a lot to promote the more widespread use of these products. So the gap isn't in the terms of the technology, the gap is more in terms of the market and kind of bringing it into everyday kind of consumption patterns in other parts of the world other than Portugal. An interesting example I came across recently was this company in the UK. They grow lupins, and they're trying to see if they can produce lupins and put them in a sauce in a can, because as many of you probably know, canned baked beans is a staple in Britain, and they're trying to see if they can produce the lupins in baked beans as an alternative and to become a staple there. So there's again, the technologies exist, and it's really kind of a behavior or market shift there rather than a processing technology or processing infrastructure gap as such there. We have this is some research or paper that was produced in 2018 that talked about the different plant-based protein products, the oilseeds, the pulses, and the cereals, and talked about the different technologies that are available, such as dry extraction, cell disruption, and wet extraction, and the ultrasound processing, high pressure processing, pulsoelectric field, microwave processing. So those processes exist to produce protein powders. But I suppose the gap then exists when you're trying to think about how can you translate that protein powder into a product. And when you're trying to develop it into a product, you're trying to think about what do consumers want, but not only what do consumers want, what are the industrial customer requirements as well. So both consumer and industrial customer will be concerned with the sensory aspects, the appearance, the taste, the texture, and the flavor. the industrial consumers to a greater extent, but also the industrial customers to a greater extent, but also the consumers will be concerned with functional aspects like viscosity and meltability. They'll also be both concerned with resource efficiency, but more concerned on the industrial side. Food safety in all of these cases is taken as a given, but they'll also then be interested in issues of cost efficiency and affordability. So depending on the attributes that are required there, then that's where you would be able to see, are there gaps there or not. But I think, it's clear that we have had considerable success in developing these products. I had a quick look online last night in Tesco and just put in vegan chicken, and they already identified that there were, over 25 products in their range in their online that they're selling online. And that isn't just, I suppose, kind of, protein. They're able to texturize these quite a bit. So there are the nuggets there, but they're also kind of the seasoned pieces and what they're calling the plant chicken breast. So they are working on the texture and creating what they call the whole cuts, as well as the more textured products in the context of the plant-based nuggets. Now, I don't know kind of the sales levels of those, but has been success if we're measuring success in terms of getting product to market and getting them on the retail shelf. So I think the technologies do exist to bring them to that stage as well. I suppose it's the repeat purchase that's really more the question there. Plant-based cheese is one that has had a significant, I suppose, challenges. It's a difficult one to get right. And there's been some interesting work done by the Fraunhofer Institute with another organization in Brazil to look at this. And they said, look, there's a lot of the main ingredients already used, the almond, soy, oat, rice and coconut, but there are some allergies with some of those. For example, the almond, some people don't really like to buy soy. There are some sustainability concerns as well. So they have decided to look at developing a textured plant-based cheese based on peas. So that was the Fraunhofer Institute and the University of Campinas in Brazil, and it's fermentation technologies in association with peas that they believe are the solution here. So they picked peas because they have a good nutrition and amino acid profile. They can be locally grown, and obviously thereby contributing to their sustainability credentials. From a functional perspective, they are soluble, they have emulsifying and gelling properties, and those properties are very important because it means the manufacturer can cut down on the need to add other additives, which obviously is of concern in the context of ultra-processed products. And some of the plant-based products tend to have a long list of ingredients. But they knew already that fermented pea can produce a good texture, but then they also obviously recognized that flavor needed to be masked in, you don't want a pea flavored cheese. So they looked at microbial fermentation to break down the off flavors, but also to build up the desirable aromas. So they were developing, identifying very specific microorganisms to help them to do that. And then, they used targeted fermentation to acidify and coagulate the whatever's produced. And then they followed the traditional processing and maturing of cheese then. So some nice work being done there to address gaps in terms of developing a textured cheese product based on fermentation technologies. Another technology that has a lot of promise in this space is 3D printing, and there's been some work done there. It's fairly easy, I was talking about the chicken nuggets earlier on. It's fairly easy to produce fish sticks, but producing fish, a plant-based fish that looks like fish, is much more challenging in terms of getting the texture right. So and also you want to preserve omega-3s and vitamins. So you need mild conditions in terms of the 3D printing. So this company called Revo Foods, they launched 100% plant-based vegan alternative to salmon in summer last year. And there's an image of it up there. So you can see from the image, it's very visually attractive. And they're able to produce 15 tons per month of that. And they're currently trying to raise funds to scale up to meet the demand that has been expressed by retailers for their product. So I suppose, technically they've been very successful, and now they're going to market, but just trying to raise some money to scale that up. So looking at the ingredients and applications and then the gaps there. So, there are a lot of ingredients available, and industry is experimenting with more ingredients nowadays. They're looking beyond the soy and the oats, and But one of the categories, you know, they're looking beyond the meat and dairy alternatives. That's seen as quite a crowded category now. They're looking to new applications. So I mentioned the plant-based seafood alternative, but there's other opportunities there. And I think just going back to the point about whether we're trying to create a meat substitute or a dairy substitute, or we're trying to create something new, I think there are opportunities in lots of unique products as opposed to replacements. And there was an example in this Food Navigator article of the mucky ice creams, opportunities in terms of sauces, eggs and desserts. So, and also this other report from the Plant-Based Foods Association, which is the US report, they talked about plant-based creamers, eggs, protein powders, ready-to-drink beverages and dips and spreads. And they said really consumers are interested in plant-based options for every eating occasion. So it's not just about the alternative meats or the alternative dairy. There's a lot more opportunities there as well. So I suppose in the context of gaps, when we think about these opportunities, it's trying to think about where are there gaps in terms of technologies, market developments, financing for upscaling to develop these as well. So moving on to the marketing, what we said in the story map was that labelling and marketing standards do not currently ensure sufficient information for consumers, and EU-wide definitions of vegan and vegetarian products, certification of plant-based foods, and an EU-wide front-of-pack sustainability labelling scheme has been called for. And as you know, there has been a prohibition on the use of conventional denominations, for example, milk, cheese and yogurt for non-dairy products. And some people believe that that hinders competition and consumer choice. But there has been some work done, and that actually has been shown in research that was published in 2022. And they found that if you talk about a plant-based chicken nugget or a plant-based sausage, that people are more likely to eat those meat substitutes if they're described using meat-related labels. And it's believed that meat-related labels may increase attractiveness and consumption of meat substitutes. And really what they're saying is that if you don't use if you don't use meat-related labels on vegetarian dishes, you're decreasing the appeal of those. And they believe, therefore, that banning those labels may weaken the ongoing efforts to reduce meat consumption. So they believe that one of the arguments for people saying you shouldn't call it a plant-based sausage or a plant-based chicken nugget, they believe that you're trying to mislead consumers. But the other counter argument is that by doing so, you're creating a reasonable identity, a recognizable identity for plant-based alternatives. And also people will have a very good idea about how to cook the products and how to serve the products. They would expect to cook them in the same way as the meat alternative or the actual dairy alternative. But some other research then would say that if you're looking at the label, that you're actually you're trying. If you don't label it, you can actually normalize the consumption of vegan and vegetarian foods. So you're not making it stand out as something different. And they do know that meat eaters are less likely to eat foods labeled as vegan and vegetarian foods. But on the other hand, they found that vegans and vegetarians, they will look at the labels, to make sure that there isn't an ingredient that could be animal based. So they won't accidentally choose those options if those labels are removed. And their conclusion from their research was that labels should be removed from menus. And they say doing that will normalize and encourage vegetarian and vegan eating. And it won't disadvantage those who want to be vegan and vegetarian, because they won't be accidentally eating such products. So they're saying removing those labels would be a benefit. And also just some other UK research, the research that I talked about there was in the context of the US. This UK research said that plant-based and vegan labels are putting shoppers off. And they even found that vegans dislike the term plant-based. So there's a bit more work to be done to be thinking about how do we actually talk about and label these foods. And I suppose, the impact of it and on changing behaviour. Brand development, what we said in relation to brand development is that there are many plant-based companies, but they face limited brand recognition. And we kind of, I suppose, at that stage, we were concluding that the market is a challenging environment. And I think now we recognise that we're possibly at the trough of disillusionment. This is a kind of a useful diagram to help us to think about, the new innovations, and people get very excited. You have a peak in terms of visibility. There's a potentially overinvestment, and then you have, people get a bit disillusioned. People are disinvesting, but then I suppose people are starting to realize, well, actually, it isn't that bad, and they start reinvesting again. So possibly, maybe, there's a lot of disinvestment at the moment, but I think they're a very solid market with credentials. So there'll be probably a reinvestment stage. So there was 2023 really wasn't a good year, and many companies were put into administration. For example, a company called Plant and Bean and Meatless Farm. A lot of established companies like Beyond Meat, Quorn and Meatless Farms, they reported losses. And that big brand Nestle, our big company Nestle, withdrew one of its brands. The declining valuations of strong brands, and also manufacturers trimmed their ranges due to ingredient shortages and high costs, and also the retailers reduced the amount of space that they were able to give to them, they wanted to give, so that resulted in range trimming as well. So tough year in 2023, but likely to be turning around for the future. And then just in relation to brand development as well, an interesting thing, aspect has emerged, that the own label is quite strong in this area. They were looking at own label growth in the plant-based product and the plant-based meat alternative versus the branded, and own label growth was 14% versus with a volume increase of 6% in 2022, which was much higher than the branded. And this picture that I've here on the right is of from a brochure from a company called Viverva, and they were responsible for one of the products that I illustrated on the Tesco shopping site there, and they have a brand, but they're also very interested in producing for private label as well. So I think probably something that we're going to see a lot more of in this space. Just briefly on the retailers and food services, I suppose retailers aren't quite sure. Their promotions are inconsistent. They don't customize promotions to the unique characteristics of plant-based proteins, promoting the health and sustainability of them. In the food service sector, there's some limited culinary knowledge about how to prepare legumes, and that can have a negative impact because they don't know how to prepare them in a manner that's digestion friendly. But I suppose two other aspects that are of interest is that there are whole cuts. So there we're talking about, the fillets, or the actual, it's not just texturized, for like in the example of chicken nuggets, it is kind of a salmon fillet or something like that. Some of those whole cuts are available in food service, haven't quite extended into the retail side yet, and that needs to happen. But online sales are offering significant opportunities for plant-based. So there's 6.8% online market share versus 3.8% in the bricks and mortar retail. So that's something I suppose for manufacturers to be aware of. There are significant opportunities there. Finally, moving on to consumers, we know that they have, they don't really understand fully how to the nutrition, and there's a bit of confusion around that, and the culinary aspects and the environmental concerns. But they are developing their knowledge. And the number of vegans is quite significant across Europe. It is forecast to grow. There's a strong belief that the growth of the demand for plant-based foods has shifted very much from being a lifestyle choice to being a mainstream. But taste and sensory aspects are still a challenge, and they are a key barrier to people who might want to eat more plant-based. And this was actually some work done and just published recently, looking at the promising alternative sources. And what they found is if you want to shift people to a plant-based diet, it's not driven by their negative attitudes towards meat. It really is more about the positive aspects of the plant-based in terms of the sensory and taste and other aspects as well. So it really is about, if we're trying to communicate and shift behavior towards plant-based, it's not about vilifying meat, but it really is very much about focusing on the positive aspects of the plant-based products. So just to conclude then, I think there's a lot of progress been made in terms of addressing the gaps, and there's a lot more potential in the marketplace. I read a paper there recently that talked about bifurcation of the market, and they talked about consumers who would be including more plant-based products at low cost. So they would, put in more lentils or peas or beans into a spaghetti bolognese, versus those that would be looking for the more expensive vegan type products that have a lot of value added. But I suppose really, if we're thinking about shifting behavior, we have to think about two potential pathways. One of which is, the developing of the alternatives to meat and dairy, and the other of which is very much looking at, plant-based as something in its own right and having value in its own right, and not setting it up to compare to the alternatives, the animal-based alternatives, but recognizing it in its own right. So I think it's not just a bifurcation of the market, it's really that those two development pathways, which then has implications for where are the gaps. If you work back from both of those pathways, there are different gaps along those. But in either case, there are many gaps. But I think anytime there are gaps, there are also opportunities. And there is definitely a role for policy through funding projects such as VALPRO Path in addressing gaps in research and innovation, and also a further role for policy in terms of market development, labelling and market standards, and those types of aspects as well. So that's it from me. Thank you very much for your attention, and happy to take the questions at the appropriate time. Thank you.
Should we directly continue, or do you want to allow some questions?
No, we should continue. We'll ask, the question can be asked later.
Okay, so then, yeah, we would continue. Basically, it's we will talk. My name is Moritz Reckling, and Heber El-Salai will now talk a little bit about the other side of the value chain. So Maeve has started from the retail and the consumer perspective, going backwards through the marketing and processing, and we are now trying to talk a little bit about the cultivation and production and the farm inputs. So I think it's a nice way to start from the demand side, because that's actually what determines also the potential for the production. And looking at the gaps that exist for farm inputs are very much related to seed availability, which is related to breeding, but also the provisioning of seed adapted to various climates. Since there's a very low area produced with legumes, seed companies and breeders, of course, have invested less money and resources into these crops. So there's definitely a gap and shortage. Soil quality is not necessarily a gap, it's more some kind of context. So it can pose some challenges, since legume crops are can be only grown to specific soil characteristics, for example, lupins with soil pH or the sand content. Water availability in legumes is important in two folds. On the one hand, in some regions, there is sometimes too much waterlogging, or let's say a rainy spring like this year in some regions, which would delay the sowing and then challenges for harvesting. While in most cases, drought is an issue, especially during critical growth stages, such as flowering and pot filling in many parts of Europe. Then there is a scarcity of inputs related to pest, disease, and weed management. So these inputs can be chemical products, but also biological products, and also equipment for physical treatments, such as weed management. These techniques all exist, but very often they are not developed in a way that they are accessible for all farmers, and often at a very high price. Harvesting equipment is also a relevant issue, especially if legumes are grown in intercropping systems where you have different components, cereals and legumes together, which needs very careful threshing and special equipment. We will soon also give some more direct insights into those gaps in a minute. But I would continue a little bit on also the production issue. So there is an issue with knowledge for crop management related to rotational issues. For example, this is also related to the pests and disease. Peas, for example, need quite a long distance in the rotation, and also a distance to crops with the same hosts of disease. Fertilization is still an issue, and inoculation, especially for crops that don't find their native rhizobia in the soils, for example, soybean and chickpea. Related to productivity, very often producers are concerned about the lower yields when comparing them with very high yielding crops such as cereals. So in that case, yeah, it will never change. We will always have higher productivity in cereals because they are like energy rich crops, and legumes are rich in protein, which is just very costly for the plants to produce. So actually that would also be the wrong metric to just look at productivity itself, but there would be probably more realistic to talk about the yield of protein. But we will also come back to that in a minute. Yield stability is a very important issue that is often mentioned as one of the main reasons not to grow more legumes, which is the fluctuation of yields over time. This is also observed for other spring crops such as potatoes, maize, sunflower, sugar beet, and also spring cereals. And actually, in an analysis, we could show that the yield variability of those spring-sown grain legumes does not really differ significantly from other spring crops, but still in the perception, they have this attribute of being very variable, and probably this is related to their low market value. And if the market value is quite low, then of course fluctuations are much more important than for high value crops such as potatoes. And the reasons for yield fluctuations are very much related to pest and disease control, irrigation, planting techniques, and weather variables. I would now hand over to Heba, who will give some insights from an analysis she did in existing databases about seed availability, plant protection products, and the yield. So Heba, maybe you can explain this.
Heba, your microphone isn't on.
You're still muted.
Sorry. So, yeah, again, good morning, everybody from my side, and I am blessed to present for you some of the findings that we have identified for the legume gap for farm inputs. We start here with the number of registered varieties. We see in the first figure here on the left side the number of registered varieties in different regions of Europe. It was clear from the data that there is regional disparities between the number of registered varieties. Specifically here in Northern Europe, we see that there is a fewer number of registered varieties, but when we look to Central Europe, they show higher. And this is also, again, comes to the interpretation that related to breedings program. So when we see the fewer numbers here, it just indicates that there is here a narrow genetic pool or limited breedings focus on this area. Sorry, you move it. Yeah, I still here. Yeah. But what we see here in Central Europe, it just reflects a more diverse genetic breedings programs. But for Southern Europe, they are somewhere lag, between Northern Europe and Central Europe. With this information about the different regions, we have tried to see what could be the comparison between the total number of registered varieties in comparison to wheat. So what we see here with this high number for wheat, it indicates we can say just a good or a well-established breeding programs, but in comparison to legumes, this both a challenge because also it highlights the need to focus on breeding programs to secure more availability or more genetic diversity from these grain legumes. Could you please move to the next one? Yes. The second gap also that we identified in farm inputs is related to the number of registered plant protection products. The figure here on the left side again identifies the differences between the region, and it shows again that there is a disparities between the regions, especially with fewer numbers in Northern Europe. And the more availability of these products is coming from Central Europe. And looking to the figure on the left side, when we compare the total number of registered varieties, we see that wheat is more protected with more plant protection products, but for legumes, they are far away from having this chance as wheat, and this makes grain legumes are more vulnerable for pest and disease pressures, thereby affecting their production and also the quality and their sustainability in the market. Yeah, moving to the next slide. Yeah, in this slide, the focus on the production trend. We wanted to see the production trend in different regions of Europe, and we can see, despite the differences between the regions, but we have a consistent trend that reflects that always grain legumes lag behind wheat. And from these data, just once we focused on one specific country in Germany, just to see how is the yield in the figure on the right side, we see again there is a big difference between the yield of grain legumes in comparison to wheat. And to fill this gap, it just gives us a hint that there is a challenge, and we need to take a lot of work just to know how to practice or how to find some agricultural practices that can just support the yield of legumes as it was in wheat. Yeah, please. Moving to the next slide is the final slide, and in this slide the focus is on yield gap, which is the difference between the potential yield and the actual yield. And looking at the two panels here on the left side, where yield gap was calculated for soybean under irrigation and also rain-fed conditions. And on the two panels on the right side is for faba bean and beans under rain-fed conditions. What we can see here in the different regions, we have a big difference between countries, and it's logic that we find this difference because of different soil conditions, different weather conditions, and again, what we said about the difference of seed availability in different regions. So now it's the most important thing that we need to work on it, just to try to close this yield gap and to find some possibilities, just maybe through breeding or some agronomic practices, and also exchanging farming knowledge between these different regions to find a way to fill the gap, just to secure higher productivity for grain legumes and also sustainability of these products that we are planning, or we have it in mind that we needed to have it in the market. With this, I come to the last gap that I want to discuss from cultivation and the production. Yeah, and thank you for your attention. Welcome to your questions.
Yeah, thank you very much. And maybe just to conclude these two sessions from Maeve and us, I just wanted to also share the methods we used. So basically, we looked at these 6 different grain legume crops: lupine, pea, faba bean, chickpea, lentil, and soybean. We did a desk study that was performed by Heba El Salai, reviewing 166 articles. So it was more a scoping review rather than a systematic review. We had 10 expert interviews across Europe to identify the major gaps across the value chain, but also other related challenges and also potentials, and also a stakeholder workshop to bring together more people to verify and validate the conclusions we have made. And with that, yeah, we would like to thank you for your attention.
Okay, thank you very much, Moritz. So I'm going to take over the Q&A session here with the help of Dusan. My name is Richard Lynch and I'm the project manager on the VALPRO Path project. So we'll start with some questions there, I suppose, for the speakers, maybe in order of how they spoke and how they presented. So Ewen, we'll go with you first. So in terms of the project, I suppose the gaps that were mentioned there in the last two presentations, how do you think the project is orientated and is going to address those gaps?
So the key thing is that our project is built around business models. So the business models cut across many of the gaps. So I suppose let me give you an example. Moritz and Hebe talked about varieties and some of the agronomic challenges that exist. But we know, for example, that there's a big demand for pea production. So in one of the regions in Europe, we have huge problems with lodging. But we know that if we intercrop pea with faba bean, the faba bean acts as a scaffold. But the key thing there is the gaps in the knowledge are what varieties of pea are best suited to be co-cultivated with faba bean, etc. So there's a lot of work underway by Sheila Alves and her team on that intercropping in IPS3. And that will lead to supporting a business model for an increased use of pea protein, which we know is very important and very sought after by food processing industries. So really the only way to fill the gaps are, first of all, obviously to identify what they are, which is what we just heard from colleagues in this webinar. But the business models then are positioned and designed to address those gaps, which is really important because we have to show that we can deliver at the end of it valid business models that are sustainable.
I suppose just in terms of the timeline of the project, there's 2 years left in the project. So you're aiming for the next 2 years that we'll have some of these outputs delivered in terms of the business models and so on for people to see.
Yeah, exactly. And we have 10 business models identified. They're in effect a bit like a Premier League of business models. They move around up and down a little bit depending on results, depending on external influences, stakeholder feedback, etc. But those 10 business models are developing very well. But actually, we also have probably 3-4 other business models that we've identified during the course of the first 16 months of the project. And some of these are actually identifying maybe where industry has failed to move on and failed to progress in developing a certain thing. And it's very important that, you know, the sector learns the lessons from those individual case studies. So we anticipate the need to detail that through other elements as well.
That's great. That's perfect. Okay, so maybe we just move on to Moritz, Maeve, maybe in terms of your own presentation. I thought very interesting in terms of some of the products available. And you mentioned that there was different value streams and different value markets for these plant-based products. I suppose the main question to be very general, how do you see the market developing for these products going forward, these value opportunities?
Yeah, I think there's a huge opportunity in across the range there. I mean, I gave the numbers there for the number of vegans and that they're projected to grow, but and obviously they'll have particular requirements in terms of what they're looking for. They'll be looking for the peas that have been incorporated in the plant-based cheese and things like that. But there's a much more, I suppose, simple market out there as well, where you were looking at the whole crops and we're looking at fairly simple technologies such as putting, you know, peas and beans into jars and tins. And I think people, even if you look at the range in the supermarket, you know, we see much more. We see different types of beans being available on the supermarket, just beans, like without kind of, you know, the extracting the protein. We see mixed beans, we see them in tins, we see them in different types of packaging now as well. And that's, I suppose, targeted more at the flexitarians who are looking to incorporate a little bit more plant-based without going against or sacrificing, you know, the what they want in terms of the meat and dairy. So there's plenty of market opportunities around there. I suppose the key thing is to think about, you know, how we can ensure that the the startup companies that are emerging in this space, some of which are quite capital intensive, you know, how can we ensure appropriate financing for them to enable them to scale up? Because some of them are you know, they're spin out companies and they have a lot of intellectual property that's very valuable. There's a lot of, I suppose, money from organisations like the European Commission through Horizon Europe projects gone into those as well, but they need to be appropriately financed to scale up, and they need to have the appropriate infrastructure that allows them to scale up as well. So like the market opportunities are there, but we have to support the spin out companies. And while there are mainstream companies such as Neste that there as well, it will be, those opportunities will be coming from both types of companies, and they need to be appropriately resourced as well.
When you mentioned the larger firms there, I suppose it's interesting. I'm always curious as to what are the motivators. You see a lot of these larger firms and food companies now shifting towards plant-based kind of products and samples available. So I'm just wondering, what would you consider the main motivators? Would it be environmental, the sustainability concerns, or would it be the health concerns of their consumers or so on?
Well, I suppose for I did some work kind of recently looking at vegans and vegetarians, and they actually have I think some of us who don't understand kind of those segments very well think they're the same and think they have the same motivations. But I think from what I looked at, the vegetarians are probably more motivated by health concerns, whereas vegans are more motivated by animal welfare concerns. So they want anything that's not animal, basically. Whereas the vegetarians are much more concerned by health. And I think that translates then into what the processors are promoting these products on the basis of. And I think it's, it is health much more so than sustainability that they're promoting them on in the marketplace. I think that those messages are resonating more strongly. Like there is a segment that is interested in the environmental credentials, but it's health probably is the stronger motivator for sure.
Yeah, absolutely. It's very interesting. That clip of work and data is very useful for the new startup firms to take on board when they're marketing their products. So that's great. Thanks, Maeve. So maybe Moritz, in terms of you mentioned the different varieties that are available and the different varietal selection kind of techniques and tools and methodologies. Just wondering, do you think there is enough diversity there in terms of the varieties available to make this plant-based market in Europe sustainable?
Yes, for sure. I think there's huge potential. We have very good breeding programs on pea, for example, and faba bean. If you think about companies like NPZ breeding faba bean that is shipped around Europe and grown in several countries. So also soybean, there is a lot of breeding activities in more southern parts, Austria, Lynch, for example, providing very good early mature varieties. And however, the potential is not fully reached. So basically, I think they have the techniques and they have the breeders and the programs that could develop the varieties farmers need. But at the moment, the market is still variable and probably not big enough to fully scale up those activities. So that, I think, is one branch to focus more on the established legume breeding programs. There's another branch that looks more into new species also that are not yet a part of regular breeding programs. For example, chickpea or lentil or grass pea that are more from southern parts of Europe that are not yet established in other parts, where you need a lot of basic selection. So starting with gene bank material, natural resources or genetic resources from the gene bank, and then also pre-breeding programs that are probably more being made at the research institutes, public organizations, universities, before they can actually reach into the private breeding programs. So I would see two parallel lines. I don't know if that was clear from what I said.
That makes sense. It's great to know that there is that room in research, I suppose, to breed on these new varieties and deliver on it. And then Hiba, you mentioned you show different maps of the growth characteristics or the level of cropping of these protein crops across Europe. I'm just wondering, with climate change advancing and the effects getting even stronger each year, do you think that the type of crops that could be grown in different regions will shift over the next number of years?
It's possible that they shift because of different things, because they can be adapted for some conditions, and that's why in the future we may see that it's easy to see different varieties in a new area. But I would say, coming to the point of breeding, and identifying resilience, especially for some crops related with focusing on the photosynthesis and all of these characters of some cultivars, it may help also to provide the breeders with some exact information to work on it. And this would end by having different varieties, and that's why they will have a chance in different areas. So the breeding program is very, very important. And also we need to do something also to support or to add from our side as information what we focus on this breeding, which characters, which traits of the crops. But they will have a chance.
Yeah, good to know. Positive. So, that's great. Thank you very much. I don't see any more questions here, so I'll just finish up. Before I do, I'd like to just let everybody know that the gap analysis, there's been a lot of work, obviously, to analyze these gaps and format them into a very large report. But it has been put into a reader-friendly format known as a story map. And that story map is available via our website. And if you go to the front page of our website, which is www.valpropath.eu, you will see at the very front page the story map for the gaps in the plant protein sector across Europe. And each of those are linked into the graphs and some of the information that was presented today, and even more information going forward. Also on our website, I should also mention, we have a number of podcasts and blogs available, very interesting on different topics the whole way across the plant protein spectrum. So it's very interesting if you want to log on to some of those and have a look through. We also have a YouTube channel. If you Google VALPRO Path on YouTube, you should find all the information on there and some of the videos we've produced so far in the project. We just have one question here that came in for you, Maeve, a last minute question. So we'll throw it at you there. Should we be targeting a particular consumer cohort, for the plant-based products?
Well, it depends.
Sorry, Maeve. I'd probably be a bit more clear if I asked you in person. Sorry. I was just wondering, the way you said that it has moved more from lifestyle to mainstream. Would this be mainly for younger consumers, or is there kind of a little bit of food neophobia amongst older consumers? Or is it kind of throughout all consumers that this is?
I think there's an interest in plant-based throughout all consumers. As you know, kind of the older cohorts are very much motivated by health concerns. And sometimes that they find, very heavy meals difficult to digest. And I think they find, the plant-based alternatives can be easier for them. But they are also very conscious of protein. So that would need to be a strong message for that older group that, they are very conscious of, maintaining muscle mass and things like that as well. So highlighting the protein credentials would be important for that group, but there's definitely opportunities across all age cohorts for sure. And interestingly, some of the work, while it would indicate a very much gendered aspect, with females preferring it, some work would say that that's not as pronounced now as well. So kind of some developments kind of on the interest, the different interests between male and females as well.
Thank you.
Thanks, Maeve. Thanks for the question, Emer. So just to finish up, I suppose, just to mention also on our website, we have a number of surveys which we're trying to conduct at the moment on different aspects of plant protein sector across Europe. So one is the consumer acceptance of these plant-based products. And the other is in relation to a technique which Ewen mentioned called intercropping, where we're intercropping pea and faba beans. So if you could have a look on the website, you'll find the information on these surveys. I'd appreciate if you had some time. They're very short, just to complete and contribute to.